This is Turkey, and why we loved every second of it. Are you enjoying our beautiful country? We heard this question almost every day. The kindness and warmth of the Turkish people is what made our journey through this country unforgettable. And while we encountered many challenges too,
a lovely big crack,
we always found that there was a way to solve them. For the past 3 months, we have been cycling across Europe towards Asia. But nothing could have prepared us for the contrast we found here. From its chaotic cities to the vast steppes, ancient valleys and stunning coastlines, Turkey both challenged and changed us. When I planned my original route across Europe, I had chosen Cappadocia as my destination, with no solid plans on where to head next. After a couple of weeks in Istanbul, spent fixing the Tallbike, designing Nova's new trailer, and exploring the city, we were ready to head east and tackle the rest of the country.
Alright then. Almost just over 2 weeks in Istanbul I stayed, and today I'm finally leaving to go towards Cappadocia.
Istanbul is a huge city, spanning more than 150 kilometers, and it would take more than a day to leave the motorways and tower blocks behind and have quieter roads again. Trucks here had deafening air horns, and most would leave me with ringing ears. I had to escape the city, and fast. By sunset, we reached Izmit, the easternmost city on the Sea of Marmara, and began looking for somewhere to pitch the tent. Nova seemed to like her new trailer so far, and definitely had a lot more space to move around now. We ventured into the parks near the lake, and found a small forested area to set up camp for the night. Every night we would set up camp, unpacking everything, and by the morning I had to pack my entire life back into half a dozen bags, ready for the day ahead.
We've got Nova here who's very hot because she's been running, good girl, all the way up the mountain. So for the downhill she stays in the trailer, of course. No.
In rural areas, we often attracted curious children. Their approach to dogs was a little different. And they didn't have many boundaries. But for the most part, they were very friendly.
Hey bro! Where are you from? England. Goodbye. Hi.
We stumbled across a litter of stray puppies on the roadside, a common sight in Turkey, and a quiet reminder of the life Nova might once have known. Their mother watched from nearby, so we knew they would be safe.
Well, I couldn't just leave them without food, so I've donated about half my bag of food and a fair amount of water, and hopefully that'll keep them going for a few more days. Hey Nova, hey, there you go. When she was that size, more or less, she would take a whole 5 minutes to eat some of these, and now they got in a mouthful, you greedy dog. Alright, we are halfway up the first hill now.
While climbing hills may have been slow, it gave me the chance to try something new with Nova. She was always bursting with energy and wanted to be part of everything I did, even cycling. So over the next few days, I would be training her to run safely alongside the trailer, with her leash preventing her from wandering off. But the day still had one more surprise in store for us. We had stopped at a supermarket to get ingredients for dinner, and out of nowhere came another stray, and within seconds they were best friends. The shopkeepers told me she had only been in that area a few days by herself, and they didn't know where she had come from.
Looks like Nova's finally met her match, who's very friendly. Which one's mine? I have no idea.
Sadly, the trailer was already at full capacity, so we started riding into the sunset in search of a camp spot. But the puppy had other ideas.
So we're now about third try. We're now about 3 kilometers down the road, and as you can probably hear, somebody decided to stick with us. So I guess this is now a thing. We'll see how long it takes her to stop following us. I don't mind. They're just a tiny bit loud. Nova, come on. Oh dear God. We're now at least another 5 kilometers on, and she is still tagging along. And I really hope that I'm gonna find somewhere nice to camp soon. Oh, and her name is now Luna. So yeah, welcome to the team, Luna. She'll probably be here less than 48 hours, but we'll see, knowing me.
As I set up camp, the puppies played, and I couldn't help but wonder what I was going to do about our latest tag-along. Tomorrow would have some steep downhills ahead, where Luna would not be able to keep up. Through the night, it felt like we were surrounded by 100 dogs, and through all the noise we lost track of Luna, who had gone to bark back at them.
So when me and Nova woke up in the morning, the stray was no longer here. It seems she had run off during the night, scavenging. That is, of course, until she smelt food. And then she came running back within 20 minutes. So now we're stuck with 2 dogs again. Yay! Let's see if she can keep up. Look at the mountains today. We're gonna die. Alright, it's now day 2 with the tag-alongs. And she's very loud. Let's just say they like to interact. Oh, it's gonna be a long day. I've got about 1,500 meters of ascent to do. I get the feeling she's not gonna keep up on the downhills. But we'll see. Hey.
The long descent was approaching fast, but there was still some luck waiting for us at the end of our climb.
And this lady who owns this truck stop has very kindly offered to adopt the now called Luna. So Luna will be staying here as of today. Hopefully she'll learn that she's staying here now and we find her a home. Yeah. So happy.
Luna soon became friends with her new owner, and it was clear she would be well cared for.
Ja, sorry. Ai, kafam vurdu. Ya. Dur. Ama acele. No. No. Gelin. Ay.
The impossible had happened, and Luna would now be safe at her new home at a truck stop cafe.
And that's the Nova Luna saga done for. There she goes. She's being kept indoors for now because she'll end up just following me. But yeah, she's been adopted, so that's great. One less homeless dog. And now me and Nova have to tackle this mountain alone. Well, I've heard about this place from many other travelers and from a few online videos as well. But here it is, Burj Al Babas, a completely abandoned fairy tale Disney-like ghost town. So, next day now. Last night I got to the top of the hill, so I stopped at the smallest settlement or village that I could find. They allowed me to camp in the park next to the mosque. And I've set off pretty early today. It's 9, which for me, trust me, is early. The whole 30 miles is all downhill. So, as you can see, I'm keeping up a nice average of about 20 miles an hour. Got the GoPro down there recording. Nova's back there. All right, let's get back to it. Alright, time to explore that cave right there. So now we have to get from here all the way up to there and now climb. If these rocks break, I go flying. If they don't, I'll be fine. There's a wall. There we go. Risky as well. Okay. Hello? And getting over to this cave here is the hard part. There we go. I think a fire happened in here at one point. I never was very good at getting down trees after getting up them. Not jumping that, I'll just kind of slide down into the hole. I guess. Well, like what was stored here or done here? Oh, that's steep. There we go. There we go. There's a dry bit. That was fun. Bye cave. Let's get back to the bike. I wonder how Nova's doing. Oh, there she is. Look at her in the shade. Oh, cute. Hello. You happy? Yeah? Chai? Yeah. Thank you. 4 miles of ascent left. But you know it's bad when they have these little signs. They don't even have a percentage. That's when you know you're f***ed. It's getting late. It's 6:30 now. Sun will be down within the next, I don't know, 20 minutes. So I don't think I'm gonna make it to the top tonight, which is a shame. About 10 hours of cycling. And I finally made it to the top of probably the biggest climb I've done in my life yet again. Yeah, Bulgaria was pretty bad, but this is topping it. The altitude here is 1,600 meters. And I got here just after sunset, annoyingly, so you really can't see much. And good morning. It's about 5 or 10 degrees here. Went down to 2 last night because of the altitude of more than 1,500 meters. But we made it through the night. We did find somewhere to camp in the end. Alright then, we've got 4.8 miles of down with 0.6 miles of down out of 2 miles of down today. How are you doing in here? Huh? We don't have a lot of water between us. We have to ration a little bit. You can eat my hand in the meantime if you want. Yeah. last sun of the day. I've been going all day. So far I've done, let's see, 48 miles so far. Let me just go up a few gears, hang on. 6 gears. And there goes the sun. And as usual, by definition, I'm now setting up camp after it's dark. These are all archaeological sites, according to my maps at least. But the main issue for camping is there's the road and then there's farm ground, and in between it is just litter, rocks. So yeah, same conundrum as yesterday. Got to work around this. There are a lot of very small settlements, which I assume, based on what the locals have said, are the refugee camps for the Syrians and Afghans and other people who come to Turkey. So I just biked out into fields, and yeah, this grove right here, middle of nowhere. But I had to bike over thousands of these, and it's going to be a miracle if in the morning all 3 tires are somehow still fully inflated. Good morning. Now, after 4.5 months of constant cycle travel across all sorts of lands, the cycling gods have finally given me
a puncture. The landscapes of central Turkey were hot, steep and unforgiving, and the routine of eat, cycle, sleep began to feel more like a chore than a journey.
Since I got my Helinox chair stolen, I've now decided to use the dog's bed in the mornings. Sorry, Nova. Oh, there's your breakfast. You're welcome. Nothing mine. I might be mistaken, but to me, if you can see it, I don't know, that is a tornado.
After almost a week crossing the arid steppes, we were finally approaching the center of the country, and one place we'd heard about from other travelers, the famous Tuzgulu, one of the largest salt lakes on Earth.
Okay, we're now about 7 or 8 miles away, and you can actually see it. It spans all the way over there. It's a massive lake, and it's pure white, as you can tell from here. It's famously known as the pink lake because when there's actually water in it, some areas are bright pink, and that's where the flamingos nest.
A single raised track ran through the center of the lake, offering a surreal perspective of the landscape around us, which felt like another world.
Don't lick the salt. It's like snow. This place is like so desolate. You can, right now, you can hear the bike, you can hear me, you can probably hear a little bit of wind. But if you stop and stay still for just a few seconds, even though there's a town only about 10 miles from here, it's just deathly silence. No wind, no animals, no people, no trucks, nothing, just deathly silence. It's amazing. And I can see what looks to be piles of what I assume is salt collected from this lake. You know, one of the main reasons that this lake is dried out, which is not a good thing because it killed thousands of flamingos last year, is because of the farming of, well, the salt.
The midday heat was intense, and I was planning to meet 2 American cyclists who were heading the opposite way. By sunset, we met Adam and Henry, and together we began the muddy descent onto the salt flats, where we planned to spend the night.
We'll just ride it. Oh wow, it's sinking big time.
I think maybe we go that way.
Yeah.
I soon realised the Tallbike wasn't going to make it through the deep mud, so I decided to lighten the load.
Okay, I'm just gonna leave these here. Come on, bike, you can do that. I guess.
You have to get out here.
Yeah.
It's good here. Wait, run out there a little bit, see if it stays like that.
Darkness was approaching fast as we searched for a way to reach firmer ground.
Ah! Yes! Woo! I take it back. No! Stop sinking! Oh, this is fun. Oh! As I'm sure you can see by my tyres, that was rough. So by some miracle I made it out, went back to pick up the bags, and the other's right there, middle of nowhere. Now, as long as this bike doesn't sink, which it keeps almost doing, we should be able to camp safely tonight, I hope. And yeah, let's see if we can get a star lapse. I'm really hopeful because the sky here is just amazing. There's very little light pollution, so I think we have the possibility for that.
We left our tents packed and chose to sleep under the stars, since it was still 20 degrees, even at night.
And this is why we should not ever trek through a salt lake.
Can you do my feet next? No. Hey, do you want to die? Do you want to die tonight? Oh, the light is on.
That night, I captured what remains to be one of my favourite star lapses, as we slept peacefully on the salt, oblivious of the storm passing quietly on the horizon. We woke at dawn, now able to see just how small our camp was against the vast white expanse of the lake. With the midday heat setting in fast, we slowly packed up camp, planning to try a different route up to the causeway with the bikes. Meanwhile, I was dealing with my second flat of the week.
shit balls, dude.
What?
I said shit balls.
Shit balls? What does that mean?
Like shit balls?
I say that shit all the time.
Shit balls?
I just started saying it again now because I'm hanging out with you again.
Wait, but are you saying like shit balls or shit
It's
balls?
separate. It's separate. It's shit and then balls. Like balls. It's two words that you know. I hope to God you know what they mean.
Is it like it's baller?
No.
My mom says shit balls,
Your mom says that you don't know what it means?
but she's like shit balls.
What does it mean?
You say, oh, bollocks a lot in America.
No, I don't think anyone has ever said that. You guys good?
Yeah, you guys should get up. My next step is gonna.
Yeah, I got it.
Okay, I'm up.
Perfect timing.
My kickstand like barely car.
Since we were going in opposite directions, we said our goodbyes and began heading towards the next town in search of a place to clean the mud from the Tallbike. But with the mud now cleared from the bike, a very serious problem became visible.
So in today's episode of Now What's Wrong With Your Bike, we've got the forks. Let me show you. So as you can quite clearly see here, the crack goes all the way through this hole. And it's been there probably a few days, maybe a few weeks. It looks like the skewer is the only thing that's holding it together. But it's definitely a patterned thing, because if you look on the other side, you can see the exact same, but actually more prominent, which is quite worrying. Now we just have to try and actually find a welder.
Luckily, I managed to track down the local mechanic, who promptly got to work.
Come on.
While it wasn't the cleanest weld, it would have to hold for now.
What was done here is just a big fat washer was welded on, and then the bottom cut out, and then a small reinforcement which was unplanned got welded into there. One thing's for certain, there's definitely absolutely no more crack there. There's 100% no chance of having any crack there right now.
The next morning we continued east, now only a day from Cappadocia.
Good morning from Ortaköy. So I woke up this morning, thought, all right, let's pack up the tent. We're 55 miles from Cappadocia. We can make it there tonight. And the first thing I wake up to is another flat. And I thought, all right, well, that's doable. It's the front tire. I do have a spare left over for that. And I checked the back. And I was like, yeah, all right, that's good. It makes it easier, right? Until I checked the trailer. Admit it, this is the best bike workstation you have ever seen. Found a big log. Wheel number 2.
With the bike fixed again, we were on the final stretch. The terrain here was dry and arid, dotted with caves and deep crevices. And yet the most unusual thing we saw that day was what appeared to be the Mona Lisa.
Merhaba.
The next day was an important one, as we rolled into another valley and began to see in the distance what had once been our final destination. After 5 months of cycling, 4 flat tires, 1 stray puppy, and more than 7,000 kilometers, we had finally reached the heart of Turkey, Cappadocia. I found a room for the night and left Nova behind, so that I could ride down into the maze of rocky valleys below, which seemed like a good idea at the time, but as you'll soon see, I probably should have left the Tallbike behind too.
Alright, on we go. Shit. Yeah, well, that's one way to do it. By the way, that doesn't count as a crash. This happens actually quite a lot usually on my rest days because there's less weight on the bike, and when you combine the less weight with really loose sand, it doesn't end well. Imagine going up a curve at an angle and your back wheel slips. It's just like that. All right, let's go again.
And despite my first warning, I decided to keep going, a decision which I would later regret.
Oh, this is pretty intimate for a boulder. And I wonder why my bike keeps breaking.
With steep drops on either side of the loose rocky paths, it was only a matter of time before something went seriously wrong. I wasn't recording when it happened, but the Tallbike had slipped off the edge of the path, taking both me and the bike down a steep drop.
Alright, how bad are the injuries? Panniers. Oh, one's alive. That's a good start. Chain completely off. Elbow. It's okay. Arm bleeding a little bit. I'm worried about the fork. Okay, let's see if I can stand up. Oh, I'm sitting in something full of thorns. Ow. Oh, that's because it's a rose bus. Okay, let's take a moment to process this. Well, my elbows are fine. It's a good start. Again, the fork has been twisted around like 3 times. And that is the worrying part. Let's do this logically. Just take a minute. Well, let's see if the wheel goes round. Always a good thing to start with, eh? That wheel's fine, that's good. Camera, still working? By some miracle, it's still working. Let's start with the bags. Take the bags off one at a time.
It was a harsh lesson about taking unnecessary risks, but I was mostly just grateful that Nova hadn't been with me when it happened.
There we go, that's good enough for me. Now let's just reverse. Okay, damage assessment. Okay, wheel goes round, that's good. Loosen it off a little bit, there we go. There we go. Front tire's good. Don't know by what miracle my wheel is still in one piece, but it is. Right then, the main frame. Check. Saddle should be fine because it basically landed on me. All the welds. Oh shit, this is exactly what I was worried about. This is one of the most pivotal points in my entire bike. A lovely big crack going all the way around the frame thanks to this little crash. So it looks like for the 3rd time on this trip I need to find a welder. I think it will survive for the day. Other than that, it should be okay. I think it's safe to ride though. Let's back up a little bit. And I found plenty of other stickers from people who I have already met. So let's add my own sticker on now. There we go. Okay, so besides that massive crack in the bike, it seems to be not too bad. Holy f***, this is too fast for me. Alright, let's give that a minute. Pretty cool. Next time I should listen to people when they say, this is a hiking trail. Maybe you should leave your bike behind. I'm only going to film this because I know it's going to go wrong. You see that? It does not look good. You know, why do I never get my crashes on camera? That would have been awesome. See? When you distract yourself, it's okay. Forget you're going to crash and then you don't.
I started making my way out of the valley to begin the search for a welder.
Nada. Oh. Sorry.
But I could never pass by caves and climbable structures without stopping to explore them first.
Well, I guess at one point this was probably the way out. Oh, this one looks pretty cool.
I made it back to town, only to get distracted by another perfect viewpoint to fly the drone from. Eventually, I found a local workshop, where the bike was being patched up for the 3rd time that month. It was now our 3rd day in Cappadocia. Every morning, I watched as balloons filled the distant horizon, glittering in the rising sun, and contemplated what we should do now that we had reached our destination, and where the road might lead us next. I knew the valleys were mostly public land, and since wild camping is permitted in Turkey, I packed the bike again that afternoon and headed back into the dusty, winding trails in search of a wild camp spot.
Into the groove, there we go. Come on bike, you can do it, oh shit. Okay, this bend, I'm gonna, too tight. Straight up, there we go. There we go. Oh. Quite a steep drop. Alright, so almost exactly 5 months and I finally arrived at my original destination, which is Cappadocia. I don't know if you can see a lot because it is getting dark. It is absolutely breathtaking here. Massive canyons, massive drops, massive everything. I'll be camping here, and this, hopefully nothing gives away, this is my view for the night. Yeah, it's a bit of a drop, isn't it? I'd chosen a spot on the edge of the valley, with one simple plan: to wake up surrounded by Cappadocia's balloons as the sun rose the next morning. Good morning from Cappadocia. Tent is here, quite literally less than 1 meter from a massive cliff, just the way I like it. But it means that I get to wake up to this view. This crazy trip, planned in a moment of spontaneity less than a year earlier, had seemingly reached its end. Sitting beside a stray dog, in the center of a foreign land, beneath a sky filled with countless balloons, and surrounded by ancient valleys. All I could think was that I didn't want this moment, or this journey, to end. At least not yet, anyway.
As I packed up the bike, I still didn't know where we would go next. All I knew is that I wanted to keep going. But with winter approaching fast and Turkey's 90-day visa nearing its end, a decision had to be made. When I initially planned this journey, my goal was simply to cycle to Turkey, the first country in Asia. What I hadn't planned, however, was how to get back. With the Tallbike too large to fit on a plane and UK pet imports sometimes costing thousands, the idea of heading back no longer seemed as appealing. We only had a month left in Turkey, and I knew Europe would be getting cold even faster. I'd considered heading east into Iran and onwards to South Asia, but with the country in the grip of the biggest protests in over a decade, that option was off the table for the moment. Going back into Eastern Europe was possible too, but I preferred to explore somewhere new. With some advice from other travelers, I made the choice to slowly head south and catch the ferry to Cyprus. Reaching Turkey's south coast would take a few weeks, but we'd have time for detours and rest days along the way.
I kept seeing these wild boar signs everywhere, and it just kept making me think of Pumbaa, so I added a little something just to make it complete, you know. I think it suits. Hakuna Matata.
The road south was quiet, winding between mountain ranges as we cycled towards the coast.
And we now made it over the pass, which is really damn big. Look at the way down, oh my god. That in the distance, you probably cannot see it, but I can. That's the Mediterranean Sea. Take a wild guess where I've arrived. The Mediterranean, about time.
A few days later, I arrived in Alanya and met Monica, a bike traveller from Lithuania. Within hours, we also found Kobe, another traveller from Ireland, and decided to spend the next few days riding together. By the next morning, I started to realise how much faster Kobe and Monica were, and keeping up meant getting creative.
Day 170 something, coming up a massive mountain, and I realised there's this unofficial set of tunnels going straight through it. But I don't see any security or any workers, so I'm just going to try my luck to get through. It means I might be able to beat Kobe and Monica to the other side and surprise them, even though I'm more than half an hour behind. Let's see if I can get through. Okay, so no lighting, no air conditioning, and no proper paving either, so it's quite bumpy. Well, I can see the end, so it's not that long of a tunnel. It is quite steep uphill, but definitely not as steep as the road that is over me right now. Slowly getting there. As it turns out, the end of the tunnel isn't actually the end of the tunnels. And straight through to tunnel number 2. I can already see the end of this one, so that's a good sign at the very least. Let's see what I can do here. Woo! They're all the way down there. Let's see if we can get through this tunnel. Whee! Whee! Ah, yeah, we can make that. Alright, we're through this one. Let's see where we are. Oh, this is actually the main road now. I think I might just wait for them. So we made it out of the tunnels. That's the next one, but these ones are connected to the main road. Kobe and Monica are down there, I think, on their way up now. I cannot believe I managed to get ahead of them. I was 25 minutes behind you.
No, don't boast about it.
We were approaching the ferry port fast, now just 2 days away. Monica and Kobe each had their own plans, and soon we'd be heading our separate ways. Whenever we stopped, a crowd gathered around us within seconds. The kids here were curious, friendly, and outgoing. That afternoon, Kobe rode on ahead, and our group became 2. Monica and I raced towards a nearby beach, hoping it might be a good place to camp. As we travelled further east, something else was becoming more common. Locals on bikes or in vehicles would follow us closely, sometimes for miles, filming TikToks as their engines buzzed beside us. It became irritating quickly, and asking them to go away only seemed to encourage them.
You should get a bicycle!
Oh, God.
Do they ever leave us alone? It's been at least 5 miles now. I'm going 5.1 miles an hour. And so are they.
Maybe we can stop?
Now?
Yeah,
Okay.
because they're so annoying.
Little did I know, this would become a much bigger pet peeve for both Nova and me as we pushed deeper into Asia.
It's so, for me it's okay, but like that sound next to you all the time. Oh my God. They're terrible, terrible.
We arrived at the beach and began searching for a place to camp for the night.
So I'm here in the tent on the beach near the water. I may have underestimated, well, the sea. On the larger waves, it's coming 3, maybe 4 meters away from the tent, which is slightly worrying. Good morning. The tide never actually reached the tent, but it did get within 2 meters. And when I woke up, this was my tent. The wind is insanely strong. There's just no headspace because the wind has buffeted this in completely like a windsock. I don't think any poles have snapped, so I think the... Oh God. And Nova, as usual, is nowhere to be seen, so hopefully she'll turn up eventually. And I was wondering where my dog is. Nova! There she is.
Since it was Nova's first time at the beach, I left her to play all morning. Meanwhile, Monica and I fought the wind, struggling to pack up our tents before they flew away. With the bikes packed, we pushed through the deep sand back towards the road and said our goodbyes, as Monica would continue riding on in Turkey, while Nova and I headed for the ferry port.
Good morning. Today I have woken up in my tent that surprisingly is not broken after yesterday's beach ordeal, and we are right next to the Mediterranean Sea again. But today is a special day. Been cycling for 180 days, and if all goes to plan, today we should be getting a ferry from about 2 miles that way, and it should lead us to Cyprus, where the plan is to hopefully stay for the winter, and that will give me time to edit these videos that I'm recording now, and maybe, just maybe, make a mediocre, if not good, series of small documentaries. But I don't have the highest hopes considering my editing skills. We will see. We will see.
After more than 2 months in Turkey, we had gained countless new experiences, learned a few lessons, and met so many amazing people along the way. I knew we'd return to Turkey one day, but for now, it was time to head somewhere new. I hadn't planned much for when we arrived in Cyprus, but I hope to take a break from cycling over the winter, allowing enough time to begin editing these videos you're watching now and plan our next steps. There are many more stories waiting to be told, and I'm working as fast as I can to release them. If you'd like to support us and the thousands of hours spent filming and editing these videos, please like and subscribe, share this video, and stay tuned for our next adventure. See you next time.